Isabel sat at the long dinner table with her hands folded in her lap, and she already knew how this night was going to end before her father opened his mouth. "So," Thaddeus said, setting his fork down slowly, the way he always did when he wanted the whole room to look at him. "This is who you brought home." Sung-hyun didn't flinch. He sat there in a plain grey sweater. He just sat there and looked at Thaddeus. "Isabel tells me you're in shipping," Thaddeus said, and he smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. "Interesting. My daughter has always had a taste for men who don't amount to much." Delphine pressed her lips together like she was trying not to laugh. Cordelia didn't even try to hide it. Isabel felt her stomach drop, but her face stayed still. She'd trained her face for this her whole life. "Stay quiet. Don't give him a reason. Let it pass." "And now a foreigner too," Thaddeus went on, cutting into his food like the words cost him nothing. "Is this some kind of statement, Isabel? Are you trying to embarrass me?" The room went silent except for the soft clink of Margot setting her glass down too carefully. Isabel opened her mouth to smooth it over, the way she always did. That was her job in this house. Smooth it over. Keep the peace. Don't be the reason anyone gets upset. But before she could say a word, Sung-hyun spoke. His voice wasn't loud. That was the thing nobody in that room expected. He didn't raise it even a little. "I walked in here tonight telling myself something," he said, looking directly at Thaddeus. "I told myself, whatever kind of man he is, he raised her, so there has to be something good in him somewhere. I gave you the benefit of the doubt before I even sat down." Thaddeus's jaw tightened. "But I've been at this table for 20 minutes, Sung-hyun said, "and I haven't seen you look at your daughter once like you were proud of her. Not once. That's not something I misunderstood. That's just who you are." Delphine's fork hovered halfway to her mouth. Cordelia's smirk disappeared like someone had wiped it off her face. Sung-hyun stood up. He reached for Isabel's hand. "We're going to go now," he said, calm as ever, like he was talking about the weather. "Thank you for dinner." Isabel stood, her legs shaking under the table where no one could see, and she took his hand. Thaddeus opened his mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came out. For the first time in Isabel's entire life, her father had nothing to say. They were almost at the door when Margot's voice, quiet as always, cut through the silence behind them. "Isabel." Isabel turned. Margot was standing now too, her napkin still in her hand, looking at her the way she always had, like she actually saw her. "Call me tomorrow," Margot said. "Okay?" Isabel nodded, throat tight, and walked out with Sung-hyun's hand still wrapped around hers. Before we go further into this story, if you're the kind of person who believes love should feel like peace and not a performance, hit that like button right now, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do it, because trust me, you don't want to miss where this story goes. Now let's get back into it. The car was quiet for the first 2 minutes. Isabel stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur past, her chest still tight from holding everything in for so long. "You okay?" Sung-hyun asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Nobody's ever done that before." "Done what?" "Said something back to him." She let out a breath that shook a little. "My whole life, I've just sat there. Let him say whatever he wants. It was easier that way." Sung-hyun reached over and took her hand again, resting it on his knee, thumb moving slowly across her knuckles. "Easier isn't the same as right," he said. She almost laughed, except it came out more like a broken sound. "That's very deep for a man who almost choked on his wine when my father called you a nobody." "I wasn't choking," he said. "I was deciding whether it was worth it to say anything." "And you decided it was." "I decided you deserved somebody to say it," he said. "Whether it was worth it to me didn't matter." Isabel turned to look at him, really look at him, and something in her chest cracked open just a little. Not from sadness this time, from something else. Something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. The strange, unfamiliar comfort of being defended by someone who wasn't asking anything in return. They got back to her apartment above the atelier a little after 10. She didn't say much as she made them both tea, her hands still not quite steady on the kettle. Sung-hyun sat at her small kitchen table, watching her, not pushing her to talk. "You know," she finally said, setting the mugs down, "he's never once, in 29 years, told me he was proud of me. Not for finishing my apprenticeship, Not when Monsieur Lacombe made me his lead restorer. Not for anything. I noticed, Seung-hyun said quietly. He blames me, she said, and her voice cracked on the last word before she caught it. For my mother. He's never said it directly, not once, but I've known it since I was 7 years old. I could just tell, in the way he looked at me, like I was a bill he never asked for. Seung-hyun didn't say anything right away. He just reached across the table and took her hand again, like it was the most natural thing in the world. You are not a bill, he said. You're the best thing that man never deserved. Isabel laughed, wet and surprised, wiping under her eye with her free hand. That's a terrible thing to say about my father. It's true, though. It's still terrible. Terrible and true can be the same sentence, he said. And finally, she smiled. A real one, the kind that reached her eyes. Neither of them knew yet that the dinner they'd just walked out of was only the beginning. Somewhere across the city, in that same dining room, Cordelia was already reaching for her phone, a plan forming behind her eyes that would set off everything that came next. Isabel didn't sleep much that night. She kept replaying her father's face, the way it froze, the way for once in her life she wasn't the one left holding the silence. By morning, she pushed it down the way she'd learned to push everything down, and went to work. The atelier smelled like polish and old wood, the way it always did, and Lacombe was already at his bench when she walked in, a loupe pressed to his eye. You look like a woman who didn't sleep, he said without looking up. I look like a woman who's fine, Isabel said, hanging up her coat. He set the loupe down. Fine women don't walk in here looking like they lost an argument with their own pillow. She almost smiled. Almost. Dinner with my father didn't go the way I expected. Did it ever? No, she admitted. But this time it went differently. Seung-hyun said something. To him, in front of everyone. Lacombe raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. That man doesn't waste words. When he speaks, you listen. I know, Isabel said quietly. That's what scares me a little. Lacombe studied her for a moment, then slid a folder across the workbench toward her. Well, no time to be scared. The Orelon Gallery called this morning. They want you to restore the Delacroix automaton for their winter exhibition. Solo credit. Your name on the placard, not mine. Isabel blinked. Wait, solo? That's the piece that's been sitting in their vault for 6 years. Nobody's touched it because nobody could figure out the mechanism. Nobody but you, apparently, Lacombe said, and there was real pride in his voice, the kind she rarely heard from anyone. They saw the singing bird you finished. They want the same hands on this one. It's a 6-week job, and if you pull it off, your name is made in this city. Forever. For a second, just a second, all the noise from the night before went quiet in her head. This was hers. Nobody could take this from her, not her father, not Delphine, not anybody. Across the city, in an apartment with too much marble and not enough warmth, Cordelia was scrolling through her phone, with her thumb moving fast, agitated. She humiliated us, Cordelia said, pacing in front of her mother. In front of everyone, that man stood up and basically called Papa a monster, and she just walked out like a queen. Delphine sat very still, her tea untouched. Your father humiliated himself, Cordelia. Don't rewrite it. Does it matter who started it? Cordelia snapped. Everyone's going to hear about this. It's already the joke of the week. Then we make sure it's Isabel who looks foolish, not us, Delphine said, and there was something cold and steady in her voice, the voice she used when she'd already decided something. There's an opening she's been given, the Orelon Commission. I heard about it this morning from a friend on the board. Cordelia stopped pacing. So, Delphine said, setting her cup down with a small, deliberate click. Your father is still a major donor to that gallery. One conversation, and that commission disappears before she ever touches the piece. Cordelia's mouth curled into something almost like relief. You'd actually do that. I'd do worse, Delphine said simply, if it protects this family's name. Meanwhile, in a townhouse near the river, Seung-hyun was on a call that had gone quiet for far too long. You're telling me, his father's voice came through the phone, flat and precise, even across the distance from Seoul, that you embarrassed a man at his own dinner table. in front of his family. I told the truth, Seung-hyun said. Truth isn't always your job to deliver, Seung-hyun. Especially not while the board is still deciding whether you're fit to run this company. Seung-hyun rubbed his temple. This has nothing to do with the company. Everything has to do with the company, his father said. You are the face of it now, whether you like the responsibility or not. And I'm hearing you've been photographed twice this month with a woman nobody on the board recognizes. Her name is Isabel, Seung-hyun said, keeping his voice level. And she's not a photograph, she's a person. There was a pause on the line, long enough that Seung-hyun almost thought the call had dropped. I'm coming to Paris, his father said finally. Next week. I'd like to meet her myself before I decide what to think. Seung-hyun closed his eyes. That's not necessary. It's already decided, his father said, and the call ended without another word. Seung-hyun sat there for a long moment, phone still in his hand, staring at nothing. He thought about how calm he'd felt standing up at that dinner table, defending Isabel without a second thought. He hadn't hesitated once, but this, his own father, flying in to size her up like she was a merger to approve or reject. This made his stomach turn in a way nothing else had in years. He picked up his phone again and called her. Hey, Isabel answered, and he could hear the smile in her voice, still riding the high of her new commission. You will not believe the day I'm having. Tell me, he said. And for a second, he almost let himself forget the call from Seoul entirely, just to hear her talk. She told him about the Delacroix piece, the vault, the 6 years nobody could crack it, and he listened, really listened, letting her joy fill up the space in his chest that his father's voice had just hollowed out. But underneath it, quietly, a countdown had already started. 1 week, and 2 women in 2 very different parts of the city were already working against her without her knowing it. The gallery smelled like fresh paint and expensive perfume when Isabel walked in 2 days later to sign the formal contract for the Delacroix piece. She was practically floating, her portfolio tucked under her arm, rehearsing in her head how she'd tell Seung-hyun over dinner that night. The woman at the front desk, a sharp-eyed director named Eloise, didn't quite meet her eyes when she came out to greet her. Isabel, thank you for coming in. Of course, Isabel said, smiling, holding out her hand. I brought the signed agreement from Monsieur Lacombe's side, and I had a few thoughts on timeline. I need to talk to you about that, Eloise said, and something in her tone made Isabel's stomach tighten before a single word of explanation came. There's been a change. The board met yesterday and decided to go a different direction with the commission. Isabel felt the floor tilt slightly under her. A different direction, as in, someone else is restoring it? As in, it's being postponed indefinitely, Eloise said, clearly uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Isabel. I fought for you. I really did. But one of our major donors raised concerns, and the board didn't want to risk the relationship. Isabel's mouth went dry. What kind of concerns? Eloise hesitated, then lowered her voice. I probably shouldn't say this, but it was Thaddeus Caldwell. He made a call. I don't know exactly what he said, but the board's decision came right after. Isabel stood there for a second, feeling something crack quietly inside her chest. Something different from the ache at the dinner table. This wasn't about her father hurting her feelings anymore. This was about him reaching into her actual life, her career, the one thing that had always been hers, completely hers, and pulling it out from under her without even having the decency to say it to her face. She thanked Eloise, walked out onto the street, and stood there for a full minute before she could make herself move. That evening, she showed up at her father's apartment without calling first, something she had never done in her entire adult life. Thaddeus opened the door himself, surprised to see her standing there, jaw tight, eyes red-rimmed but dry. Isabel, I wasn't expecting. You called the gallery, she said, cutting him off, her voice shaking but not breaking. The Orelon board. You told them not to give me the commission. Thaddeus's face didn't move much, but something flickered behind his eyes, something like being caught. I was protecting this family's reputation, he said finally, after that scene at dinner. That scene, Isabel said, was you humiliating a man who never did anything to you, and instead of apologizing, instead of even thinking about how that made me feel, You went and took away the one thing I built completely on my own. Do you understand what you just did? I understand that you embarrassed me in my own home, Thaddeus said, his voice rising now. You embarrassed yourself, Isabel said, and her voice cracked, but she kept going, 29 years of silence finally breaking apart at once. I have spent my entire life being quiet for you, being careful for you, never asking why you can't look at me the way you look at Cordelia, why you've never once told me you were proud of anything I've done. And I told myself, fine, maybe that's just who he is. But this is different. This isn't about you not loving me. This is you actively trying to destroy something I earned. Thaddeus's mouth opened, but nothing came out for a long moment. You don't know what it's like, he finally said, quieter now, to look at you every single day and... He stopped himself. And what? Isabel said, stepping closer. Finish the sentence, Papa. For once in your life, just finish it. But he didn't. He looked away instead, and Isabel felt something in her chest go cold and final. Forget it, she said. I don't need you to finish it. I already know how it ends. She turned and left, and this time, nobody called after her. Margot caught up with her outside on the sidewalk, having slipped out behind her, breathless. Isabel, wait. Isabel turned, wiping her face fast, embarrassed to be seen like this even by Margot. I heard, Margot said, about the gallery. Cordelia was practically bragging about it to Mama this morning, like it was some kind of prize. Isabel went still. Bragging? Margot's face fell, realizing what she'd just admitted. It was Mama's idea, she said quietly. She's the one who called Papa and told him to make the call to the board. Cordelia just went along with it, like she always does. Isabel felt sick. Not surprised, exactly. Some part of her had always known Delphine hated her enough to do something like this, but hearing it confirmed out loud, from Margot of all people, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Why are you telling me this? Isabel asked. You could get in serious trouble. Margot looked at her for a long moment, something steady and certain settling over her face, like she'd finally decided something she'd been putting off for years. Because I'm tired of watching them do this to you, and saying nothing, she said. I've been quiet my whole life too, Isabel. Maybe it's time both of us stopped. Isabel pulled her into a hug, right there on the sidewalk, and for the first time all day, she let herself cry without trying to stop it. Neither of them knew that 3 days from now, Sung-hyun's father would land in Paris, and everything that felt broken tonight was about to feel very small compared to what was coming. Sung-hyun's father, Han Do-yun, arrived in Paris on a Thursday afternoon with 2 assistants, a driver, and an expression that made it clear he had already made up his mind about several things before his plane even touched the ground. Sung-hyun met him at the townhouse, and the 2 men greeted each other with the kind of formal stiffness that passed for affection in their family. You look tired, his father said, which from him was practically a hug. I've had a lot on my mind, Sung-hyun said. I imagine so. His father set down his briefcase and looked around the room, taking in the shelves of antique clocks and automata Sung-hyun had collected over the years, the ones his father had always dismissed as childish. Still surrounded by toys, I see. They're not toys, Sung-hyun said evenly. They're craftsmanship. Someone spent their whole life learning to make something like this work. His father's eyes lingered on a small mechanical bird on the shelf, the one Isabel had restored for him months ago, the very first thing she'd ever fixed for him. Is this hers, the clockmaker? She's a horologist, Sung-hyun said. And yes, I'd like to meet her tonight, his father said. Dinner, someplace quiet. Sung-hyun felt his jaw tighten. This isn't an interview, father. Everything is an interview, his father said simply, when you're the only heir I have. That night, at a small restaurant near the river, Isabel sat across from a man who studied her the way you'd study a contract you were about to sign, looking for the fine print that might cost you later. Sung-hyun tells me you fix clocks, Han Do-yun said. Among other things, Isabel said, keeping her voice light even though her heart was hammering. Automata mostly, mechanical figures, things that were built to move and sing and surprise people, over 100 years ago, and somehow still can if you're patient enough with them. And this pays well? It pays enough, Isabel said, to make me happy doing it every single day. I think that matters more than the number, honestly. Han Do-yun's eyebrow lifted slightly, the first real reaction he'd given all night. That's an easy thing to say when you're young. Maybe, Isabel said, meeting his eyes without flinching. But I watched my own father spend 30 years building something enormous and successful, and I've never once seen him look happy doing it. So I decided a long time ago I'd rather build something small and love every second of it. Sung-hyun watched this exchange quietly, his hand resting near hers on the table, not saying much, letting her speak for herself the way she'd always been able to, if anyone had ever just given her the room. You don't strike me, Han Do-yun said slowly, as someone who's interested in my son's money. I didn't know he had any until my mentor nearly fainted over his last name, Isabel said, and for the first time that night, something close to a real smile crossed the older man's face. I liked him before I knew any of that. I still like him for the same reasons now. Han Do-yun was quiet for a long moment, turning his glass slowly on the table. My son has always cared more about old machines than the family business, he finally said. I used to think it was a weakness, a distraction, but watching him tonight, the way he's been looking at you all evening, like you're the only thing worth paying attention to in the room, I'm starting to think I misunderstood something. Misunderstood what? Sung-hyun asked quietly. That maybe the machines were never the distraction, his father said. Maybe they were just teaching you how to be patient enough to wait for something real. Isabel felt her throat tighten, unexpected tears pricking at her eyes. She hadn't expected this man, cold and calculating from the moment he walked in, to say something like that. But the warmth of the evening didn't last long. Sung-hyun's phone buzzed on the table, and when he glanced at it, his whole face changed. What is it? Isabel asked. He turned the screen toward her without a word. It was a headline, already spreading fast online, from a gossip outlet with more reach than credibility. A blurry photo of Isabel and Sung-hyun from weeks ago, paired with a headline claiming she'd been quietly meeting with a lawyer about a prenuptial agreement before they were even engaged, framing her as a woman circling a fortune before the ring was even on her finger. Isabel's stomach dropped. That's not... I've never even met with a lawyer. This is completely made up. I know, Sung-hyun said, already dialing someone. But it doesn't matter if it's true. It's already out there. Across town, in an apartment with too much marble, Cordelia was refreshing the article over and over, watching the comment count climb, a small, satisfied smile spreading across her face. She had no idea, not yet, that the article's origin was about to be traced directly back to the email address she thought she'd been careful enough to hide. By morning, the story had spread far beyond one gossip site. 3 more outlets picked it up, adding their own spin, and by the time Isabel checked her phone at 7, her name was trending in 3 different countries, for reasons that had nothing to do with her actual life. She sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling through comment after comment from strangers who had decided, based on one fabricated headline, exactly who she was. Sung-hyun called before she could even process it fully. Don't read the comments, he said immediately. Too late, she said, her voice flat. Isabel, none of it is true. My legal team is already working on getting it taken down, and we're going to find out where it came from. I know it's not true, she said, and her voice finally cracked, just slightly. But it doesn't matter, does it? People believe whatever confirms what they already wanted to think. A woman like me, with a man like you, of course they think I'm after something. A woman like you, Sung-hyun repeated, his voice firm. You mean brilliant, hardworking, funny, the most honest person I've ever met. That's the woman I know. Anyone who reads one fake article and decides they know better doesn't deserve your energy. She closed her eyes, letting his words settle over the ache in her chest. I have to go into work. Lacombe's expecting me. Call me after, he said. I mean it. When she arrived at the atelier, Lacombe was already standing by the door, arms crossed, phone in his hand. You've seen it, she said, more statement than question. I've seen it, Lacombe said, and I've also seen the phone ringing off the hook all morning, with people asking whether the atelier still stands behind you. Isabel's stomach twisted. And what did you tell them? Lacombe looked at her like the question offended him. I told them that in 30 years of running this atelier, I have never trained a more gifted or more honest craftsman than you, and that anyone who doubts your character clearly hasn't spent 5 minutes in a room with you. He softened, just slightly. You don't need to worry about this place, Isabel. This is your home. Nothing some cruel little article says is going to change that. Isabel felt tears sting her eyes again, but this time from something closer to relief. Meanwhile, across the city, Sung Hyun's legal team had already pulled the metadata from the article, tracing the anonymous tip that started it all back to an email account, registered under a name that took less than an hour to connect to Cordelia. Sung Hyun stared at the report for a long moment before calling his father. It was her, he said. Cordelia, Isabel's stepsister. There was a pause on the line. Are you certain? Certain enough that I'm going to her mother's apartment right now. Sung Hyun. His father's voice was sharp. Think carefully about how you handle this. You're not just protecting Isabel anymore. You're representing this family's name too. I know exactly what I'm protecting, Sung Hyun said. And it's not the family name. He arrived at the Caldwell apartment an hour later, and Delphine opened the door herself, clearly startled to see him standing there alone. Mr. Han, she said, recovering quickly, arranging her face into something polite. This is unexpected. Is Cordelia home? Sung Hyun asked, his voice calm, but with an edge underneath it that hadn't been there at dinner weeks ago. Cordelia appeared in the hallway behind her mother, arms crossed, trying to look unbothered and failing. I know it was you, Sung Hyun said, looking past Delphine directly at her. The article. My legal team traced it back to your email within an hour. I'm not here to yell. I'm here to tell you that by tomorrow morning, every outlet that ran that story will be issuing a correction, and every one of them will know exactly where the lie came from. Cordelia's face went pale. You can't prove. I already have, Sung Hyun said simply. I'm not interested in destroying you, Cordelia, even though you clearly tried to destroy her. I'm interested in the truth being known. That's all. Delphine stepped forward, her composure cracking for the first time since he'd arrived. This is a misunderstanding. My daughter would never. Your daughter did, Sung Hyun said, and for the first time his voice rose just slightly, enough to fill the room. The same way you made a call to the Orelon Gallery Board to have Isabel's commission pulled. I know about that too. Delphine's mouth opened, then closed. You've spent years making that woman feel small in her own family, Sung Hyun said, his eyes moving between mother and daughter, and she never once retaliated, never once tried to hurt either of you back, even when she had every reason to. I don't understand people like you. I really don't. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. By the way, he said, Margot already gave my legal team the emails, weeks ago, so whatever you're about to say to cover this up, she already knows the truth, and so does everyone else who matters. He walked out, leaving Delphine and Cordelia standing in stunned silence, the foundation of every lie they'd built quietly, finally, starting to collapse. The correction articles went up within 24 hours, exactly as Sung Hyun promised, each one quietly retracting the original story and confirming that the claims about Isabel had been fabricated by a source close to her own family. It didn't erase everything. Some people had already made up their minds, the way people always do. But the tide turned fast, and within a day, most of the same voices that had piled on were now defending her instead, calling out the outlets for running an unverified story in the first place. Isabel sat with Sung Hyun on her small couch that evening, scrolling through the corrections together, exhausted but lighter than she'd felt in days. I still can't believe she did that, Isabel said quietly. Cordelia, I knew she didn't like me. I never thought she'd go that far. People do strange things when they feel like they're losing, Sung Hyun said. I think some part of her has always known you were the stronger one. This was the only way she knew how to compete. Isabel leaned her head on his shoulder, quiet for a moment. What happens now? With your father, I mean. Did this change anything for you? For the company? Sung Hyun was quiet for a second before answering. He called me this morning, before you woke up. Isabel sat up slightly. And, he said, watching how I handled it, going straight to Delphine's apartment, not letting it slide, not asking anyone else to fix it for me. He said that's the first time he's seen me act like someone who's actually ready to run something, not because I made a smart business decision, because I defended someone I love without hesitating. Isabel's breath caught slightly at the word, quiet and unplanned as it slipped out of him. You said love, she said softly. Sung-hyun looked at her, and for once, the calm, careful man she knew looked almost nervous. I did, he said. I meant it too. She smiled, the first full, easy smile she'd had in days, and leaned in to kiss him, slow and certain. 3 days later, Isabel got a call she wasn't expecting. It was her father. She almost didn't answer. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment before she finally pressed accept. Isabel, Thaddeus said, and his voice sounded different, smaller somehow than she'd ever heard it. Papa, I heard what happened, with the article, and with Delphine and the gallery. He paused. I want you to know, I had no idea Delphine went behind my back to actually make the call. I was angry that night, and I said something cruel to try to punish you both, but I didn't think it through, and I certainly didn't know she'd go and use it the way she did. That doesn't really change what happened, Isabel said, careful, guarded. I know, he said quickly. I know it doesn't. I'm not calling to make excuses. I'm calling because... He stopped, and she could hear him breathing on the other end, like he was trying to find words he'd never had to use before. I watched that man defend you twice now, once at my own table, and once, I heard, at Delphine's door. And I kept asking myself why a stranger could do something so easily that I have never once managed to do for you in 29 years. Isabel's eyes stung. Why couldn't you? There was a long silence. I don't have a good answer, Thaddeus finally said. I told myself for years it was because you reminded me too much of things I'd rather not think about. But watching you this week, watching how you handled all of this, with more grace than I've ever managed in my entire life, I realized that was never really your fault. I made it your fault because it was easier than looking at myself. Isabel sat down slowly on the edge of her bed, tears finally slipping free. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight, Thaddeus said. I know that's not something I get to just ask for. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. All of it. And I'm sorry it took this long. Thank you, Isabel said quietly, for saying that. I don't know what happens next between us, but thank you. After they hung up, Isabel sat in the quiet of her apartment for a long time, phone still in her hand, feeling something loosen in her chest that had been tight for 29 years. She didn't know yet that Delphine, humiliated and cornered, was about to make one final, desperate move, one that would force the entire family into a room together one last time and finally bring everything crashing into the open for good. The call came from Margot, breathless and fast. You need to come to the apartment. Right now, Mama's called everyone here. She says she has something to announce. Isabel stood frozen in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. Announce what? I don't know, Margot said, but she's been on the phone all morning with lawyers. Something about the trust, about Papa's company. I think she's trying to do something before it's too late for her. Isabel called Sung-hyun immediately, and 20 minutes later, they walked into the Caldwell apartment together, this time with Isabel's spine straight and her chin up, nothing like the girl who used to sit quietly at that table, absorbing every insult without a word. Delphine stood at the head of the table, like she was still in charge of something, though the tremor in her hands told a different story. I called this meeting, Delphine said, because I think it's time this family faced some facts. Facts, Thaddeus repeated slowly, arms crossed, standing near the window. Go on then, since you seem to have plenty. Delphine's eyes flicked toward him, something almost like panic behind them. I think Isabel has manipulated this family long enough, turning Margot against us, bringing outside men in here to attack you at your own table. I think it's time we discussed whether she should have any place in this family's future at all, financially or otherwise. Manipulated, Isabel repeated, and for once, she didn't feel the old urge to shrink. She felt something steadier instead. Delphine, you called a gallery board to sabotage a commission I earned with my own 2 hands. Your daughter leaked a fake story to the press to try to ruin my name, And you're standing here calling me the manipulator. I don't know what you're talking about, Delphine said quickly. You do, Thaddeus said quietly, and everyone turned to look at him. I know you do, Delphine, because 2 days ago, I asked my accountant to review the family trust after some numbers didn't add up, and what he found didn't have anything to do with Isabel at all. The room went very still. What did he find? Cordelia asked, her voice suddenly small. Thaddeus reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded set of papers, setting them on the table without a word. Delphine's face went pale as she looked at them. Money, Thaddeus said, moved quietly out of the firm's accounts over the last 4 years. Into accounts tied to you, Delphine, funding, from what I can tell, a lifestyle that was never supposed to come from the company at all. Thaddeus, I can explain. You've had years to explain, Thaddeus said, his voice rising for the first time, not at Isabel this time, but at the woman across the table. Years where you fed me every small complaint about Isabel, every exaggerated story about her being difficult or ungrateful, and I believed you. I let you shape how I saw my own daughter, because it was easier than admitting I was too broken to see her clearly myself. And this whole time, you were the one stealing from this family, not her. Margot stepped forward then, something fierce and finally unafraid in her face. I gave him the emails, Mama, the ones proving Cordelia sent that article. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see what you two were doing to her anymore. Cordelia turned on her sister, furious. You betrayed us! No, Margot said, steady despite the shake in her voice. I finally stopped betraying her. The room fell into a silence heavier than anything Isabel had ever felt in that apartment. 29 years of buried resentment and guilt, finally sitting out in the open, where nobody could pretend it wasn't there anymore. Thaddeus looked at Isabel, his eyes wet in a way she had never once seen in her entire life. I owe you more than an apology, he said quietly. I owe you every birthday I missed, every moment I made you feel like you weren't enough. Every year I let this woman poison how I saw you, instead of just looking at you myself and seeing what was actually there. Isabel's throat was tight, tears finally falling freely. Why couldn't you just say that before? Why did it take all of this? Because I was a coward, Thaddeus said simply, and you were never the one who needed to change. Delphine, sensing the ground shifting completely beneath her, tried one last time. Thaddeus, please, we can fix this quietly, we don't need to. We're done being quiet about anything in this family, Thaddeus said, cutting her off, his eyes never leaving Isabel's face. That's exactly the problem that got us here. The weeks that followed moved fast, faster than Isabel expected anything in her life to move, after 29 years of everything feeling stuck. Delphine and Thaddeus's marriage ended quietly, without the dramatics anyone might have expected, mostly because Thaddeus no longer had the energy to fight for anything that wasn't already broken beyond repair. Delphine moved out within the month. Cordelia, humiliated and exposed, went quiet on every platform she used to love, flooding with her opinions. And for the first time in years, nobody in the family missed the noise. Margot stayed close to Isabel instead, the two of them meeting for coffee most weeks now, finally building the relationship that should have existed all along, the one neither of them had ever been allowed to have. The Orelon Gallery reinstated Isabel's commission within days of the truth coming out, this time with a personal apology from the board chair himself, and she spent 6 weeks bent over the Delacroix automaton, coaxing its ancient gears back to life piece by careful piece, the way she'd coaxed her own life back into something whole. On the night of the exhibition opening, the gallery was full, champagne glasses catching the light, but Isabel barely noticed any of it. She stood beside the restored piece, watching it move for the first time in decades, its small mechanical figures turning slowly to a melody that hadn't played in this room in over 100 years. Thaddeus showed up that night, unannounced, standing quietly near the back of the room in a coat that looked a little too big on him now, like he'd lost weight he didn't have to spare. Isabel saw him before he saw her, and for a long moment she just watched him, deciding. Then she walked over. "You came," she said. "I wouldn't have missed this," Thaddeus said, his eyes on the piece behind her. "It's beautiful, Isabel, truly." "Thank you," she said, and for the first time, The words didn't feel forced between them. They felt real. "I know I don't get to undo 29 years in one night," Thaddeus said quietly. "But I'd like to try, if you'll let me." Isabel studied his face for a long moment, searching for the coldness that used to live there, and finding, instead, something that looked almost like grief for all the time they'd lost. "I'd like that too," she said finally, slowly, but yes. He nodded, and for the first time in her entire life, her father reached out and pulled her into a hug, right there in the middle of the gallery, and she let him. Later that night, after the crowd had thinned and the gallery lights had dimmed, Sung-hyun found her standing alone in front of the automaton, watching its small figures move one last time before the case would close for the evening. "You did it," he said, coming to stand beside her. "We did it," she said, leaning into him. "All of it. I don't think I could have gotten through the last month without you." "You would have," he said. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. I just got to stand next to you while you did it." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You have a way of making everything sound so simple." "Some things are simple," he said, and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small box she hadn't noticed until that exact moment. Isabel's breath caught. "I wasn't going to do this tonight," he said, and for once, his calm, steady voice had the smallest tremor in it. "I was going to wait for some perfect moment, but I realized I've been waiting for the perfect moment my entire life, and I don't want to wait anymore." He opened the box. Isabel's hand flew to her mouth. "Isabel Caldwell," he said, "will you marry me?" Before she could answer, before either of them could say another word, the gallery's front doors opened behind them, and a voice neither of them expected cut through the quiet room. "Isabel, wait. Before you answer him, there's something about your mother you need to hear first, and it can't wait another day." It was Margot, breathless, standing in the doorway with her phone clutched tight in her hand, and an expression on her face that made Isabel's stomach drop straight to the floor. If you want to know exactly what Margot found, and what it means for Isabel's entire future, make sure you're subscribed. Thank you for staying with me till the end. If this story moved you even a little, drop a comment and let me know, hit that like button, and I'll see you in the next one.